Welcome to the Fallen State. I am Jesse Lee Peterson. Thank you so much for being with me. Remember that the Fallen State is now on locals.com. So click the link in the description to support our work. And thank you all in advance. And also, you can support the Fallen State by joining our channel our channel membership on YouTube. I have with me Lee, better known as Legalman. He is a lawyer and host of the Quash Podcast. Lee, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. You know, I'm reading a little bit on you, watching some of your videos to get a clear understanding. Very interesting person. What is important to you?
Well, I mean, lots of things are important, but as far as what I do on my show, I like to try to show people the truth about what the legal system really is. There's a lot of misconceptions about it. It's mostly just a bunch of brainwashing. And if people knew the truth, the system could change. And until they know the truth, it's not going to change.
You went to law school, as you said. What made you go to law school? Because I read that once you went, you really didn't know anything, the truth, until after you graduated. Why you decided to go, and what brought on the desire to learn the truth?
Well, I've always been kind of a troublemaker, and I've never really accepted things at face value. I went to law school for the reason a lot of people do. There's a lot of lawyers in my family, but I thought being a lawyer would be cool. I thought it would be kind of a way to be a hired kind of gun where you just argue with people and you kind of push things around inside the system, and that sounded attractive to me. But law school is mostly just a bunch of brainwashing, like every other kind of education.
Yeah.
And when I got out, I did a bunch of different things. I worked at a very large name firm for several years and didn't like that, and left and was a public defender for a year. And so I tried a bunch of cases on the criminal side, took a huge pay cut to do that. Then I went to practice with some friends of mine. That thing fell apart with one of the guys became kind of addicted to coke, and his kind of life went down the drain. And that's not that uncommon with trial lawyers. And Then I went, and I've been pretty much practicing on my own. I do some collaborating with other lawyers for about the last maybe 20 years. And so I don't really do well, and I don't want another partner, and I don't even do a lot of legal practice really anymore. So.
You said that it took 25 years after graduating from law school to unlearn everything they taught you there. How did you know you needed to unlearn that? First, let me ask before you answer that. While in law school, did you know that you were being brainwashed?
There was signs that the stuff didn't make sense. I'd ask questions about basic constitutional issues, and there really were no answers. And how much time are you going to spend when you're a broke law student trying to make use of your, time? There's no money in figuring out the truth. And so it's basically just a system. And so I used the system. I got out, and the goal was just to simply use and manipulate the system, which is all it really is. And then when I realized how bad it was and started getting really screwed by the system again and again in different kinds of cases, and seeing it up close and personal, seeing how badly screwed people were, it started really getting under my nerves. And then it wasn't 25 years after law school before I figured it, but about 25 years ago, I got the internet. And once I got the internet, I was able to get access to information that simply wasn't available readily before. And there was no way to find it. And so in fairly short order, I figured out the way the system actually works as a result of having the internet. And, I think that's the deal with everybody. Everybody now has access to the information and has had it for 25 years, and there's just no excuse anymore.
What is it? What is a trial lawyer? What is it that trial lawyers do exactly?
Well, what people think they do is try cases. What they actually do is just push paper around inside a phony baloney system where you use these fake rules to screw people. And that's really all it is. You periodically go to trial. There's very, very few trials actually occurring. About 98% of all civil cases settle And roughly the same on the criminal side. The criminal side is just a shakedown. It's an extortion system by the state. And the civil side is not significantly different because nobody knows what's going to happen at a trial because it's such an absurd system. And it's so convoluted that it's sort of like going into a minefield. So everybody knows, even if you got a great case, something could happen. The judge could rule in a weird way. Someone might find some obscure case. They might decide your witness might blow up on the trial. Anything can happen in a trial. And so, the ostensible theory of what a trial lawyer does is to help people supposedly get justice or in some form or fashion. But there's no justice inside the system. So nobody inside the system is doing anything like that.
I noticed that in today's society, you can't even trust the jury that they were going to make the right and honest decision because they seem to be so biased and all screwed up now that it's hard to pick a good jury.
Oh, yeah. It's massive brainwashing. It's huge jury tampering that goes on in the media and has not just in academia and media and government for decades and decades. So everybody's just totally and completely brainwashed. And then the judges themselves, they violate the Constitution because they don't even allow you to discuss jury nullification, which is a constitutional right. Supreme Court said as much in the 19th century when it was really the only kind of case it even addressed. But yeah, you're going to have a big problem with juries because the selection process is so totally screwed up, because every single stage of it is completely screwed up. And that's why I'm saying that until people understand the fundamental nature of how screwed up the system is, as far as the difference between what they're told it is and what the reality of what it is, until people understand that, there's not going to be any fixing it. It's not going to.
Give me an example, because I'm black and slow, so I kind of try to break things down so I can understand it. Give me an example of something that once you unlearn, that you learn and that we need to understand, something that we can understand.
Well, I mean, it's pretty much all that kind of stuff. But I mean, there's a bunch of simple examples, like a large number of cases in the civil side are dispensed with under something that's called the summary judgment. A summary judgment is what they run around. They call it a trial on paper, but it's not a trial on paper. It's a motion to the court where you have a bunch of different miscellaneous documents attached to it. And the court decides, and the standard that they use is whether or not there's any reasonable jury could possibly find in your favor. Well, that's not a standard. That's unreasonable. That's the judge deciding what 12 people might say. And the idea that allows you to have a trial, which you supposedly have a constitutional right to, is preposterous. But they allow it. It didn't even exist until the 1930s when the Supreme Court dreamed it up with the rules. Before that, the only thing you could have would be something called a judgment on the pleadings. A judgment on the pleadings makes sense because under that standard, there's no set of facts you've pled that could ever entitle you to recover. So in a civil case where it'd be like, well, you're asking for a breach of contract, but even if everything you say is true, every single thing you say is true, there's no breach of contract here. Okay, well, then you don't decide, you can't win. That's fine. And that always existed in the law. Whether you think it's a good idea or not, I think it's reasonable, at least. They inserted this new standard of this trial by jury goes away and you get a summary judgment, which means that no reasonable jury could find that was a breach of contract, meaning that given the facts, the judge is saying no jury could do it. Well, put it in front of a jury and let's see. I mean, what even is this crap? It makes no sense. What do you mean? If no jury can, it's just a way to expedite things. It's another way that the state can extort people. And there's lots and lots of different things that are decided like that. The vast majority of so-called discrimination employment cases, vast majority of so-called securities cases and things like that, if you overcome summary judgment, which is virtually impossible, if you do, then in all likelihood, they're going to settle the case. But the vast majority get poured out at so-called summary judgment. So that would be a simple example.
Is it a waste of time to go to court nowadays?
Well, I tell my clients, the few I ever take, look, if you wind up in litigation, you've already lost. I mean, you can't win unless you have very, very deep pockets. I learned very early when I went to work at a large firm that very wealthy people and these corporations, they just use the law so they don't pay their bills. I was amazed. They just don't pay their bills. People like you and me, we pay our bills. We're expected to pay our bills. They just don't. They just take it into litigation because the numbers are so big. it's cost effective just to roll that into a cost of doing business. They just regularly simply don't pay. And there's not really any legitimate basis for them not to pay, except that they can manipulate the system and therefore save money by not paying. And that's, a large amount of litigation is that people think that the litigation abuse is on the plaintiff's side. You hear it all the time, about how it's not true.
So litigation mean that, for those who might not understand, is if I take a big company to trial, and they say, okay, rather than having a trial, my lawyer, your lawyer, we'll all get together in a little room and we'll try to come up with a best solution. And most of the time, I will end up with the lesser as the plaintiff because the big company is not going to pay big anyway.
Yeah, well, litigation just means you file a lawsuit. And most lawsuits that get filed, they don't get tried; they get settled.
Yeah,
they get some other resolution. And the most common place people have interactions with trials is divorce court, insurance cases like an auto wreck, or some kind of bogus traffic or minor crime. That's how most people interact with the legal system. And every one of those things is absurd, laughable extortion systems. And there's no way to win. In insurance defense cases, they have a sort of way they operate, and it's they deny the claims initially, and then they delay the claims, and then they defend the claims. And there's whole courses taught on those three things: deny, delay, defend. And that's the way they work, because if you have been injured by somebody in an auto case, somebody hits you, and okay, so what is the insurance company? Well, what do they care, right? What do they care? It's just a cost of doing business, and they have these lawyers on retainer that will take it up through trial for flat amounts in most of these jurisdictions. And so you have to get your own lawyer. If the system worked in any form or fashion reasonably, you wouldn't need to have to go get a lawyer. Well, what are the facts in an auto case? Why do you need a lawyer?
Yeah.
Somebody hits you from behind. What do I need a lawyer for? I don't understand. This is a simple case. If a case that simple can't even get through the system without a lawyer and all this rigged up crap, well, then the system's just so completely broken and ridiculous.
That's amazing.
And there's many other reasons too, like the Constitution gives you the supposed right to have the counsel of your choice. Well, there's no such thing as law schools when the Constitution was supposedly ratified. There was no such thing. Well, now the only person you can get to hire to represent you is someone who goes to a state-sponsored law school, gets fully accredited, has to get licensed by the bar, has to be approved, and all these different things. Well, none of that stuff existed. None of that existed. Why should I have to hire somebody that has to have gone to a state-accredited law school?
Yeah.
Why? Just to drive the costs up. Vertical supply, no different than doctors. It's all the same.
There are a lot of men who have made babies with girlfriends and wives and things like that. And as soon as things go wrong, the first thing the woman does is take the man's children away from him and then take him to court and make him pay through the teeth, pay her money in a lot of cases, and pay the child money. Should men waste their time going to court when those things happen? How should they deal with that?
It's like most things. An ounce of prevention is worth, 100 pounds of cure. You don't have a good chance in the family courts as a guy.
Right.
And you're definitely up against it. And it's, it was all a planned destruction of society. They brought in the pill and no fault divorce, and they pushed all the crap on people. Well, as soon as you have no fault divorce, it doesn't make sense. Divorce, a supposed marriage, is a contract. That's what the state recognizes it as such. It's how they treat it as such. It's the only contract that can be unilaterally altered by one party and then still enforced by the state. It doesn't make any sense. You're never going to win. In most of the states, the vast majority, like the one I'm in Texas, even if it's not your kid, if you're married, there's a presumption it's your child. And unless you go get a genetic test prior to the time the kid's like 2 or 3, really, unless you find that out. Even if you later find out that's not your kid, you still have to pay child support on that kid. And so there's countless stories. That's how outrageous it is. It's completely insane. And, the court is rigged in favor of the women. They say it's not.
No, it is.
But a family court is what they call a court of equity. not even a legal court. It's a court of equity. Now, they pretend to be a legal court, and they act like they're using these different kinds of decisions and things like that. But the reality is the judge gets to do whatever they believe is in the so-called best interest of the child. And the idea that the state stands in the position of making a decision about what's in the best interest of a child on its face is preposterous. If you're ever going to find anybody, the worst possible party to make a decision about the best interest of the child is a government bureaucrat goon. And that's exactly the system. And the people accept it because it's so long. They've just been told that, seen so much propaganda around it in movies and TV. They never even think about, why? How does the state get authority over this in any form or fashion? Those questions are never asked. But you're going to, if you get tagged by a woman, if you have a kid with them, you best get it genetically tested very, very rapidly, because if it's not yours, you're off the hook. But even if it's not yours, as I've said, you can easily be caught on the hook. She can be fooling around on you while you're married, have a kid by somebody else, not tell you, get divorced, you find out a few years later, and you're still on the hook for child support. You can't get out of it.
So
Happens to lots of men.
it does. I know. I hear about it all the time.
Right.
So is it best that a man not get married and make babies with these women, or not marry women who already have children so they don't be stuck with that?
I mean, you got to be careful. They've created a society that's so dangerous. They want to make sure that the men and women are in constant combat now, as opposed to trying to find each other and work as a team. They want to make sure everybody's blown apart, fighting with each other, and looking to the state, the so-called government, to both pay for kids in all sorts of different ways, unfairly make the men pay for things. Hey, the men also screw the women around in that. Tons of these guys, they don't pay anything. They have kids but different women. They can't get them. It falls both ways. The society itself has fallen apart.
Yeah.
And that was intentionally driven in order to, again, bring government in as the now surrogate family.
Speaking of Texas, there is a man there, and I can't think of his name right now, but it's in the media. I've interviewed him before. His wife or ex-wife now want to turn his son into a girl, take off his body part and add a female body part, because the boy is never going to be a girl no matter what you do. He went to court. He fought it for a long time, and it just ended out of court, according to the report. And according to the report, California is now allowing the mother of the children to turn them into whatever they feel like. And so this woman is moving to California, and according to the report, to turn the boy body part to a girl body part. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, beginning to end, every part of that. And I remember some of that story, and there's some technical aspects to the story, but they're too complicated to get into. But the bottom line is that now we have this people who don't want to give their kid a vaccine. You're divorced. What do? Maybe the state orders, and maybe your ex-wife wants to turn your son into a daughter. Maybe they want to start puberty blockers. Maybe they want to do stuff without your authority. Maybe they want to move them out. All these things that the average person can't possibly afford to go in and fight this stuff. It's totally and completely impossible. But as soon as you fail to fight it, you start losing all sorts of rights and claims. You start waiving them, and they start timelines, government created timelines start running and passing for that. You had to have so-called complained. Well, you couldn't afford to. All right. So what do? You file some pro se thing. You try to piece it together. You're going to lose. I mean, it's a good point of, once you go into the system like that, you're not going to win unless you have a lot of money and want to be in the system, because you know how to manipulate it. Just regular people, average people who are trying to pay their bills, they cannot afford most family law advice. It's not possible, because it costs a lot of money. It's tens of thousands of dollars to do anything in the courts, because everything requires this absurd over paper of everything. It used to be long time ago. Everything didn't have to be so filed. You go down, you talk to the judge knew you probably knew opposing counsel, and they would give you the decision. That doesn't even happen now. You go down to any family court, you'll see a standard docket. It's called a cattle call. Basically, it's just open docket. You may have 150 matters on the docket for an hour and a half period. It's preposterous. The courts, they don't have time to read the documents. I can't tell you how many state judges I've been in front of. You got a motion, you have to spend all this time preparing all this paperwork, costs thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. You get up there, and the judge says, I haven't read the motion. Why don't you tell me what it's about? It's very common. They almost never read the motion. They just want you to tell you. The motion is about appeals.
Amazing. So,
Yes.
so should a man even bother to go to court to try to fight for his children?
Oh, yeah, you have to show. See, as soon as you stop showing, you don't go, you get served with some kind of bogus paper, you think it's kind of innocuous. Well, it's not going to be. It's probably going to cut off all sorts of rights. You have to be active in it. You have to try, because at least that attempts to preserve some rights. Because if you don't, if you just let it go, it's not going to turn out.
But you're going to lose all your money either way. If you go to court, you're going to lose. If you don't go, you're going to lose. And a lot of guys don't have that kind of money. And so, and then once let's say you get visitation rights, which is ridiculous. A father should already have that. But let's say you get visitation, the woman going to make it difficult for you to see your child. You got to come at a certain time. You got to have it back at a certain time. You can't bring your other woman with you. You got to do this and do that. It's still going to be a headache. Why even bother? I understand what you're saying. It's just going to be, but why even bother? We're just going to be trouble anyway. It's just not going to work out either way.
It's a personal decision. It's not really a legal matter. It's a personal decision. And I can just tell you that if you don't participate in the charade that is the legal system, then you're probably going to lose even more rights. I'm not saying you'll end up in a good position if you do. I'm saying you're guaranteeing you're going to end up in a way worse position. Yeah. And most men who want to see their kids, they're not happy with a worse situation. Yeah, and so it's heads you lose, tails you lose worse. And it's what are you willing to live with? Are you willing to walk away from your kid? Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to just say, I gave up on you? I don't know. Most men probably don't want to do that.
They don't, but some of them don't have money. They have no other choice.
True.
What if you don't have money and you don't want to lose your kid? Should you still? How would you go to court if you don't have money?
Most of the people have no money in that situation. Who's a guy? The woman probably doesn't have a lot of money herself.
But she doesn't need it. The court is on her side.
Well, the court is. She still has to file documents. Okay, so what you end up in those situations is really ultimately just this total S show going on, where you've got both parties who are not in any way represented by counsel. She probably doesn't afford lawyer either. So she's filing documents to the extent she's getting anything filed. They're garbage. Maybe she's gone down to there's a lot of places, a lot of law schools, they run clinics and they will represent you for free on these basic kind of family law matters. So if as long as you're a decent guy, you haven't created a huge problem, you can probably go get that. And like I said, for the most part, if you don't have any money as the man, it's very unusual that the woman has a lot of money and the guy has no money. That's a pretty unusual circumstance. For the most part, the guy doesn't have any money, the woman doesn't have any money. You're on relatively even footing that as far as that goes. Yeah. And yes, the court is going to, in all likelihood, be extremely biased in favor of the woman. But just the standard status quo stuff like standard orders, she'll be entitled to standard orders unless she can show something else. If she doesn't have a lawyer, well, she's not going to be able to show anything else. If you show up and you're showing good faith, you're going to get standard orders. Standard orders aren't great, but you're going to get access to your kid. You're going to have all the standard deals, and you'll still have preserved your rights.
Amazing. That man that I mentioned about the woman wanted to change the boy to a girl. It was James Younger. And the mother, according to the report, the woman that got hold of his son, not even the real mother. She's not the mother of the child. She just had to.
Oh, my God. It's never ending.
She's not even the mother. So I want to ask you this.
Yeah.
Knowing what, and then I have other questions about the Civil War and all that. But knowing how messed up the system is now for you, knowing the truth, how you function in the system, knowing what's really going on? How do you function?
It's difficult. I mean, I that's one of the reasons I do my show. I more than 10 years ago, I started a blog for the same reason, just to kind of, be at least able to have a clear conscience. Like I said, I don't really do a lot of practice anymore because it's just so frustrating to be inside the system. There's some lawyers who are decent, but most are, they really just don't, honestly, they just don't care about the fact that the system is so corrupt. They know it is, but they're too busy trying to, pay their own bills and do the other. That's the system they've created, and they put everybody in this fake money system. And then they create a legal system that completely sucks. And then you have these lawyers, a ton of whom are simply brainwashed, but a lot of them who actually care. They try to do the right thing, but it's almost impossible. See, because you've got obligations to your client, and so. If you're obligated to do the best thing by your client and the system is set up so that your client can screw other people, well, then you're kind of obligated to screw other people. I mean, it's really hard to get around that,
When you say they set up the system, who is they? Who set this up like this?
Well, the entire legal system has been set up for a long time. Originally, there's something called common law, and that's what everybody still thinks we kind of semi-used in the courts. But as soon as you make these rules that there's a single court called the Supreme Court that so-called makes the law, and that every court after that has to follow these cases, and then you have all the other ones where you have to obey whatever the law is so-called, meaning whatever an appellate course in your division, if you're in federal court or if you're in state court, depends. They have circuits, they have each state breaks them up differently. As soon as you have to do that, as soon as you must follow that, well, that guarantees the system's never going to work. And they've set all the rules up. I gave you the example of summary judgment. There's all sorts of other rules. There's a court-appointed rule. The court made it up in Texas that you can't tell the jury that there's insurance on the other side. Well, think of how that operates in an auto case. In an automobile case, everybody knows that you have to have insurance. It's mandatory. You have to have it. So everybody knows. Everyone assumes there's insurance. So you go to try an auto case in Texas as a plaintiff, meaning you're trying to sue the insurance company. The insurance company gets to sit there and pretend it's Miss Little Old Lady sitting at the table. You can't tell them that's State Farm, dude. That's nationwide.
Right.
You can't tell them that. So the jury's just assumed that the case has already been settled by the insurance company, and your client's just greedy and trying to get extra. When the reality is this is insurance company sitting here, but you're not allowed to tell them. Why? Because the law, so-called law, that a court dreamed up in our state 80 years ago on a completely and totally unrelated case that has nothing to do with the case that where you have mandatory insurance, and then they carry it over, and now what can you do? So now that's the law. And so it's the system, the structured system of the idea that a court must do this and it must do that. The purpose of a court is that the court should do the greatest justice in every single case. That's the purpose.
Yeah.
If it's not there to do the best justice for this case, this set of facts, why are we having it? Well, the way the system's set up, it guarantees it will never do that. And so the people who set it up are the people who want to use the system, the people who we can all see in the media who commit crime after crime after crime, and not a damn thing happens to them.
Right.
Because they run the system, they control the system. Well, that's the purpose of the system. So just like all those wealthy clients I represented in corporations who have access to all sorts of both corruption, which I've seen up close and personal, and just the very fact that you can just wear people down. You can just wear them down with money over time, and you spend years and years and years, it's screwing your life up. Well, you're going to eventually settle and take peanuts on a dollar. Those people benefit from having the system run the way it does. And so, as usual, the people in power, they've set it up. And over time, slowly and slowly, it's completely and totally seeped into every aspect. It used to be you could get decent justice in smaller towns and smaller locales and stuff like that. Big cities have always been horribly corrupt, but now it's just pretty much everywhere. It's just, I mean, it's almost impossible to find any kind of court that's doing anything close to justice.
What a mess.
Greatest freest, baby.
The Constitution, does it mean anything now?
Constitution, whatever that thing was when they first dreamed it up. It's in secret with its curtains drawn and not telling anybody and sealing the records in there for 30 years so nobody can see them. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Whatever that was, and then whatever the made up ratification process, whatever it was, it died in 1861 because it's completely impossible to fight a war to hold a voluntary union together. It doesn't matter what you're fighting over. If you want to go down and fight to free slaves, which that wasn't what the war was about, but if you want to, great, I get it. Go down. But then you can't then claim that those states have been brought back in on a voluntary basis.
Right.
That's preposterous. You can't have them both. If you want to go down there and claim to be a do-gooder, which they weren't. But if you want to claim to be a do-gooder, okay, more power to you. Sign up, tell everybody you did that. But then don't pretend that we're living in the greatest, freest, and it's a voluntary union of states or people. It's not.
Did they force the South to join the Union?
Well, after the war, it was time to re-up. Of course, what they claim is that the official history is that it was a rebellion. It was a rebellion. Well, there wasn't a rebellion. It was the people in each individual state voted to leave. They voted, and not in mass. They didn't just start rioting and try to tear things down. They weren't trying to take over Washington, D.C. and claim that everybody in other states had to also have slaves. None of that happened.
Right.
We're told our vote is the most sacred thing in the world. Okay, well, hardly anybody could vote back there anyway. But of the people who supposedly could vote, they voted to leave and start their own country. I don't understand. How can that not be okay? That doesn't make any sense to me. They voted to leave. And then the official story is that those votes weren't possible. They were a legal nullity. That's what, in effect, the Supreme Court held in Texas v. White. And that was actually just a case over money. It had nothing to do with caring about anything else. But the bonds wouldn't have been valuable if they had found anything else. And so to keep the charade going that we're the greatest, freest, we fight for freedom, the Constitution protects us, and all this nonsense that people believe and are taught, they have to have it as this rebellion. And, the person that's, I think, the greatest voice on that was Lysander Spooner. He was both said that there's no treason for the Southern soldiers who fought the Union, and they did try to do. And he also was the biggest abolitionist. He also wrote all the sorts of reasons why the slavery itself was completely wrong and totally unjustified under the Constitution. And that's a consistent position. See, what they've done now is they've turned it into, if you take the position I do, which is the Civil War was in the Civil War. Yeah. They weren't trying to get control of Washington and win. Washington went down there and killed all the people, burned all their stuff, committed endless war crimes, and then wants to pretend like they were down there to save the slaves. And none of that happened. And whatever the Constitution was prior to 1861, and I think it had maybe some small amount of validity before that, whatever it had since then is completely gone.
When I grew up in Alabama, down in Montgomery, Tuskegee area. And growing up, I remember when the Confederate flag was not a racist flag. It was a sense of pride, and there were black people and white people who took pride in the Confederate flag. And now they have made the Confederate flag look like the enemy of the country. It made it
right.
I couldn't comprehend that at first. Now that I'm older, I understand how good and evil work, but I couldn't understand how they successfully turned the Confederate flag into a racist, so-called racist or race issue when it wasn't about that at all.
Right.
And
the war wasn't about that. It was about a lot of different things. It's not that slavery was no part of it. Of course it was. But the reality in the South was only about 25% of the people in the South even owned a slave.
Yeah.
And only about 2% of the people in the South owned any more than one slave. All the vast majority of people had one slave who had even had a slave. And like I said, only 25% even had even a single slave. And for the most part, they were not significantly worse off in most situations than poor workers are today or back then.
Absolutely.
That's the reality. And it was a very small group, 1 or 2% of the people down there had all the slaves. They had these huge amounts of slaves and they ran them. Okay, well, does that sound familiar to people today? About 1 or 2% running. Yes, it's the exact same system. And the idea that when you have 1 or 2% of the people have basically all the slaves, how are you going to motivate all those people, 75% of whom have no slaves at all? Why would they fight a war to keep something they don't even have? And the 25%, when you only have basically all of them only have one slave, believe me, they're not fighting to keep that slave. It's just a fantasy. It's a story that they're told because it sounds good. And the reality is terrible, which is that the Union wanted to hold it together because it's a banker's war like everything else so they could exploit people. It's always about exploiting people. Yeah. That's all the government does is exploit people.
Absolutely.
And they divide and conquer us and then exploit everybody they can.
That's what the so-called civil rights movement was all about. I think one of the worst things that ever happened to the blacks It was abortion and the so-called civil rights movement. And
it's completely destroyed it. I mean, it was doing great. Yeah, it was segregated, but it was doing great compared to what it is now.
Absolutely. And black, not all, but most black people have not been able to return to a normal life since the so-called civil rights movement happened. It was all about brainwashing and controlling the people. But what's so interesting to me, maybe I'm just old, but what's so interesting to me is that the blacks won't even pull aside for a moment to question, well, what was this really all about? Why is it that the blacks are worse off today than they were before the so-called civil rights movement? Why is it that prior to the civil rights movement, blacks and whites got along? They knew it was a spiritual issue, right and wrong, good versus evil. They were not into this thing called racism. Racism didn't even exist. I never heard the word. And I grew up on a plantation. Pick cotton. Have you ever picked cotton?
No, but
you have not lived till you pick cotton. But it wasn't all about that at all. But yet, Martin Luther King and all those guys turned it into that, and it's just been devastating to the blacks ever since.
Devastating. It's like everything else. I mean, you're not allowed to talk about anybody. It's not that there aren't people who do it. They do talk about it, but they will try to quiet you. They will try to threaten you. They will try to trap you in some other form or fashion because the narratives are so fundamentally untrue, and they have to remain untrue in order for the system to prop up, that they just can't allow any free discussion of any honest facts. They have to just name call you. And there's no way around it at this point because they got such a tight control in the media and the education systems and all of the financial systems, so that if you just step out of line the slightest little bit, something you said in social media 10 years ago, well, now you're destroyed. Well, everything's some kind of government licensing. Now you got a problem with your government license. You can lose your license. You can lose your certifications. You can lose your business. You can get all sorts of things. It's also centrally controlled that, they always want to divide the people, always. And, it's human nature for people to like other people who are similar to themselves. I love diversity. That's why I don't like the way they push diversity, because if you keep pushing that, there's not going to be any diversity. It's just going to be one big blob of people who are all pushed together, and there's really no diversity. And when they sell diversity based upon this idea that we all have to be jammed together, that's not the way it works. I love going to eat at all sorts of different kinds of restaurants, but I don't want to be made to eat that food every damn day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I don't want to. That's right. I like Korean food. I don't want Korean breakfast. Okay, but if I have to have it, I don't understand. And so again, it's like, it doesn't make sense to me that the people, if you like that kind of thing, then it needs to be okay for people to hang out with people they like, whoever that might be. If you want to hang out with a bunch of different kinds of people, great. Yeah. Most people want to go home and be comfortable, and they're comfortable with the culture they were raised in. That's what they're comfortable with.
That's
you might
right.
be interested in others, but you're comfortable in the culture you were raised in.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't matter anything else. That's the bottom line, and you can't change that with people.
I know, and in this country, they have what they call affirmative action and all that mess. And then when these black kids go to the white universities, by choice, not by force, they want to go there, so it seems. When they get there, now they want black graduation. They want black dorms. They don't want to play with the white folks. I'm like, well, why you go to their school? Why you go to their schools and you don't want to play with them? Isn't that a mess?
They've messed people's minds up so much.
Yeah.
Everyone's so confused, and anybody who steps outside of the approved narratives is just immediately called all sorts of names and potentially destroyed. And so the ability to think clearly it's just gone. And the vast majority of people, they don't think clearly anymore. And most of the people who can think clearly, they look around, they see, I better not say anything, because they see what happens if you speak up. You get in trouble.
Why are white men so afraid to speak up? I know I'm asking a question I already know the answer to, but I want to hear from you. White men, especially all white men really, they turn the weak men into gay people, but why are white Christian straight men so afraid to speak up? They turn their children over to the public schools. They allow them to be critical race, brainwashed. They just let the system do whatever they want to the children. And white men are not, except for Donald Trump, the great white hope, He is white men are afraid to speak up for themselves, and they are being attacked like 90 going north, openly attacked. They say out loud, we don't like the white
Openly.
man. Why are
Absolutely.
white men allowing this?
It's, I don't understand the mindset of people who just are okay with the way the system operates.
Right.
I don't get
Me
it.
either.
I don't understand it. And I can't relate to it. I can observe it, that it's incredibly common, but I can't understand the mindset because, well, it goes back so many different things. You look at World War I, World War II. They made sure they destroyed entire generations of people, and the governments have made a very, very clear desire to eradicate any of these warrior cultures where the men were truly strong and weren't afraid to die fighting
Right.
for something they believed in.
Yeah.
That has to be completely wiped out. You have to just be totally milquetoast. And when they government gets control of every kind of certification, regulation, requirement, license, which they have now, you can't do anything without some kind of government approval.
Yeah.
Then they have the fake money system, which allows all these fake businesses to succeed. And then they can place people in those positions who push that entire thing. Well, now good luck trying to come up through the ranks and be anything except for a go along yes man who does exactly what they're told. If you don't, then you get cast out. And so I understand the self-preservation of it, but something I talk about in my show all the time is I don't understand how people are okay just completely screwing their kids and grandkids.
Me
I don't get
either.
it.
I can't
They
get
tell
that.
me that that's the most important thing to them. Oh, my kids are well, then why are you doing it? I don't understand. Well, why are you putting up with this crap?
I
Why are you
agree.
allowing this? I don't understand it. It's a total disconnect to me. It's a total disconnect.
I know I can't get it. I gotta ask you this. Time is going by so fast with you, man. And I'm finally having a grown-up talk here. A grown-up conversation. The white men who founded and created the greatest country on the world, America, right? With the help of God, they were able to do it. Did they have an intent that I don't know about? Did they do something wrong that I don't understand? Because it's crazy to me that these men went through all the hell they went through to create America, to make it what it became. And yet it seemed to be so easily destroyed. Is there something I'm missing?
I think that there's a lot of complication there. It's when you talk about the men who did this, the men who didn't do this, they were all just a bunch of individuals. And ultimately, the purpose, the reason, in my opinion, for the breaking away from Great Britain, England at the time, well, it was a land scam. At the high levels. At the high levels of the land scam, once they cut off in like 1768 or something, the king declared that you couldn't move west of the Appalachians. As soon as they did that, well, all those guys who were very wealthy landowners and claimed to have land all out there and all this incredible amounts of wealth, and the individuals who wanted to move out there because they knew that's where the money was. You go out, it was the real money in this country was land. As soon as you didn't allow that, they started to foment some dissent. I don't believe the standard story about the Tea Party and all that other stuff. But you also have a group of men who are very different, who fought the war, than the ones who so-called gave us the Constitution. They're a completely different group of people. There's a little bit of overlap, but I mean, everybody, at least when I was growing up, and I'm 60, and when I was growing up, you heard this fantasy about how George Washington could have been king. He was so popular at the end. Look at the government they actually chose, the Articles of Confederation, which is just basically written out of our history books as just this kind of failed experiment that we needed to get more powerful and the whole place was falling apart and all this crap. Those are all lies. The reality is they chose an incredibly decentralized, extremely weak central government. The idea that they would have voted him to be king is ludicrous. It's as fake as the idea that we're building back better now. That's not true.
I know.
Anybody
That's
can
not
see
true.
it, okay? Yeah. And so the Articles of Confederation are an incredibly, very, very decentralized system that works quite well. And if we went back to that, we wouldn't have any of the problems we have for the most part. And the Constitution was formed about 12 years later-ish, dreamed up by very rich people. And a lot of people, like Patrick Henry, he refused to even go to the convention because he smelled a rat in Philadelphia. Tons of them didn't go. A huge number of so-called delegates didn't go because they knew what was up. Tons of them walked out. So the getting of the Constitution is one thing. The men who fought for it, they fought for all sorts of reasons. All sorts of men went off in World War I. They signed it to go fight the war to end all wars. Was that what that was? No. Was World War II anything about that? No. Or any of the stories? Or was Desert Storm about that? With weapons of mass destruction? Or is the Ukraine the story we're being given? No, it's always lies. So people are often stirred to fight for all sorts of things that may or may not even be true. They may be fighting for a lie, but you also have to remember how small this was. One of the biggest battles in the Revolutionary War that was so incredibly important, that occurred in Kentucky, they had 100 men involved in the fort, 100 dudes. This is nothing. We're not talking about, it's not hundreds of thousands, millions of people. It's 100 guys in a fort. This thing is built up as an incredibly important thing. It's like, okay, maybe it was a critical battle for, something that happened, but you have to understand what a totally different time it was. A completely different time. And to say things like we and they, you have to look at individuals.
Yeah.
Everybody might have had their own motivations. Some of these guys might have been good, some of them maybe not. Maybe some were something else. George Washington's nickname was the Town Destroyer. That's what he was known for from the French and Indian Wars, because he slaughtered people. He'd go through, he'd burn the town, he'd kill the women and children when the men were gone. That's who he was. Okay, so how many people know that? Well, very few, because again, the history is shaped and molded by the people who benefit from it. And this government, if the Constitution creates a limited government, and it's the most brilliant document of all times, then there's no such thing as a brilliant document, because this is the largest government that's ever been created in the whole history of the world that supposedly exists under the Constitution. And it can literally tell you how much water can flush in your toilet, and it's limited. It makes no sense. And so what we're told with the document, with what the reality of the document is, and what we're told about why they did it versus the reality, very different. We're never going to know the true intentions of any man. I can't know the intentions of a man sitting in front of me at a table. He can tell me, but I can't know what's in his heart. Yeah. Only he knows. Only he knows what's in his heart. And so when Hillary Clinton tells me that she's doing something for my benefit, okay, I can assume she's not doing it for my benefit, but she says it. And what we have is speeches and writings. Yeah. Well, if you read the writings of politicians throughout time, they're nothing but the best of intentions. Well, how many of them were and how many of them weren't, we can't know.
I remember you mentioned the driver's license, and I remember when I first got a driver's license, it was just a simple driver's license, right? And and I used to wonder, why did they make us renew the license every so many years, right? It was still the same piece of paper, the same person, and nothing changed. And then they're at a point now where they make you put another little extra thing on the driver's license in order to travel. I forgot what they called it. But in order to travel, you have, what is wrong with we the people? You mentioned building back America better or something like that, right? Yeah. What is wrong with we the people that we can't literally see the wrongdoing, what's really going on? Why don't the people see it? And then you mentioned the internet. There's a lot of information on the internet. How do we know what we're reading to be true on the internet? First of all, what's wrong with us that we're not seeing Americans not being built back better?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a lie. Yeah, be built back better. It's just a political slogan, like all of these political.
But the border and everything is out. They're sending out money to Ukraine while the borders are wide open, crime through the roof. Everything bad is happening to this. Why don't we, the people, see that? Why don't the people see that?
Well, again, I think it's a complicated question. But one, there's absolutely no constitutional basis for the government to simply give money to a foreign country. Right. I'd love for someone to point that out to me. It's never raised. All they ever talk about is it's bad policy. We shouldn't be doing it. Not that they have no authority to do it, that we shouldn't be doing. That's everything now. It's only whether we should or whether we shouldn't. And that's because constitutional conservatives don't tell people the truth, because they are controlled opposition. That's the problem. And when you say, why don't we see it? Huge numbers of people love what's going on in this country. They love it. And so the idea that we're going to somehow come together, convince these other people, that's not going to happen. The income tax code itself Anybody can pull the figures up and see the top 25% are the only people who are really paying anything. The top half pay something. The top 10% basically pay everything. And so the bottom half are paying nothing. Well, why are they ever going to change? Well, there's nothing to fix. They're fine. They're not paying any income tax. It's true they pay Social Security, Medicare, what they call these payroll taxes.
Yeah.
But of course, none of that stuff's even used for what they think anyway. And so the people are fundamentally confused. They have no idea what they're talking about, but a huge number of people disagree. They simply disagree that the country should be run in a certain way. A huge number of people want the state to do everything.
Yeah.
They want to take all your money. They want to take it and redistribute it. They want to take it and use it for their own pet projects. That's what they want to do. And so when you have a system set up like we do, as preposterously as it is with this fake representation system, then you're never going to be able to move it. And as long as people imagine that things like we could build a movement and take it back, we can't build a movement and get rid of 150 million people who disagree with us.
Yeah.
They're never going to be convinced because they're not confused. They're lazy, or they've figured out ways to get the system to work for them. Okay, well, we can't stop that. There's no way to stop any of that. And if you can't stop it, the idea that if we could somehow work hard enough, they love to blame the people. We don't get organized. We don't vote for the right people. They've got a million different ways they blame the people. It's not the people's damn fault.
Yeah.
It's the system is set up in a way intentionally to make sure that a very small group of people can control a very large group of people. And it works perfectly for doing that.
You know what threw me off at one time in my life? When I was growing up in Alabama, we were taught to buy land, that the best investment you can do for yourself, buy land. So when I moved out here at 18, when I turned 25, I went and bought my first house because I knew it was a good investment. But what I didn't know is that you never really own the house. You can pay it off. And I have so many family members who have paid off their own homes, but they don't own them because you still have to pay taxes. And if you don't pay taxes, the government can take your house. What kind of sense does that make?
It's the idea that any government can take money that's not voluntarily taken from the people and be legitimate is ridiculous. When have I ever said it's okay for the government to set any kind of rate it wants and just take my money? I don't understand. That's robbery.
Right.
They tell me it's consent. Well, I'm telling you right now, I don't consent. So in the law, nothing is recognized as this consent that would be implied when I'm giving you my express non-consent. There's nothing in the law that recognizes it. It's just a made-up thing where they say, well, it's government. It's like, okay, well, just saying government is not a magic word, and it doesn't get out of jail free card, but the property is a classic example of how they can just increase the taxes anytime they want. That entire system is used to destroy public schools, how they increase these values. They get these developers. They buy this land cheap. They get the government to develop it with these inside deals where they put roads and sewer and all. It already increases the value of the thing massively. And then they destroy the schools that are closer in so that people who want a decent school for their kids have to go further and further out in order to buy this land that used to be crap land that's now been jacked up in price.
Yeah.
They move out there and then their price becomes valuable. And then they move that thing and they destroy that thing. They move you over to the other one that has to be grown. And they just move it all around. And then an inside set of jokers will go and buy the stuff that's been driven into, in effect, the worst kinds of low-end land that's been gutted with ghettos, which the vast majority of the businesses are empty. They're owned by these corporations. People want to use a business. They can't afford to rent. The damn thing sits empty. Yeah. And somebody would be happy to go over there and put their business in there and fix it up, but you can't because it's owned and they don't need it. And then a small group of people cuts an inside deal, buys all the houses up. Next thing you know, a huge renovation project from the state is announced, and then tens of millions of dollars are going to come in. They're going to build bridge, and now they're sitting on all the homes. The people who owned them have all been pissed. That happens all over the place. It's a giant pump and dump game that's run at very high levels. And this is just the reality that people don't want to face, that it's not about trying to get the right people in. It's about the fact that the structure of the system is set up so that you're never going to win as long as you support it. It's impossible.
What?
Unless you join.
So let me ask, do you have kids?
No, I do not have kids.
Are you afraid to bring kids into the world?
I don't say I would be afraid to, but I'm very close to my nephews, and I like kids. I feel bad for them because they're so screwed. It's one of the reasons
Yeah.
it's one of the reasons I do my show is just because, you know, the only reason I have anything around here, and there's plumbing, the reason there's anything is because there's people who came before me. They made a lot of different advances. They put a lot of work in, and I've benefited from that. Well, I have an obligation to the people who come after me to keep the thing at least as good, or to at least try to make it some better. And since the whole thing's working to try to get completely screwed, I feel an obligation to those people, because the reality is that people keep forgetting is that if we lose this time, it's over.
Yeah.
It's no more of this
Yeah.
hard men create good times, and good times create soft men, and soft men create hard times. That's not going to happen again. They're going to put us all in electronic digital prison, and that's going to be it. There's not going to be any fighting next time. That's why you have to stand the ground now, but the people don't care to. They just don't care to.
So because of time, man, we I got to put you on the hot seat, but I got to ask, how do we turn this? Can it be turned around, and how, if so?
It can be, it could, in a theoretical way, it can be turned around. I've done all of Spooner's trial by jury. It took me 28 episodes. People need to understand jury nullification. If they understood jury nullification, we need a very small group of people. Anything that requires us to get majorities and votes, that's crap. That's not going to happen. First, you have to get jury nullification, because then it doesn't matter what laws they pass. They can't get convictions. If they can't get convictions, then you can ignore them with impunity. See, once you have that, then you can start buying time to decentralize. The system needs to be massively decentralized. You cannot have these centralized systems. And that's why people have to understand that this pushing this Constitution and getting together, and we the people are going to rise up, that's never going to happen. It can never happen. If it was going to happen, it would have happened. The system moves in one direction for 250 years, bigger government, fewer rights, more debt, more taxes. It's the exact same system all over the world. There's not a single government that's ever been installed where the people got freer and freer and freer as they voted. It's never, ever happened. The government's never gotten smaller and smaller and smaller anywhere in the world. And so people have to understand that they fundamentally don't understand what's happening, that they fundamentally misunderstand the construct and the narrative, and they have to understand that decentralization is the way. And the very first step is understanding the people's rights in jury trials, so that they couldn't take the jury trial away from people without raising a lot of eyebrows. It's true, they've manipulated the thing into, it's not even recognizable. It's such an absurd kangaroo system now. But if people understood it, we wouldn't have to get the legislature to do something. The people are supposed to have the power. They don't understand that the power comes in that jury box. That's where the power actually is. That's when you get to go in and vote no on the law, period. You get to vote no. If the judge tells you, oh, well, you must follow this and must follow that, no, you have a right to say, no, I'm not convinced. You have that right. And the people have been so convinced by endless propaganda that that's not the way it works, that the court tells you the law and the jury is there to decide these made up facts that the judge lets in. If people understood, you want power, the most important political power in this country is inside the jury box. That's where it is.
Amazing. So what's the first step to start learning, discovering what's really going on? For those who just don't know, the first step is, I know they should start tuning into your podcast for sure.
They should listen to my show. That's why I make it. But,
right. And then after that, what?
You know, I've got hundreds of shows, and people need to understand a lot of it's too complicated. Well, it's not I make it simple, but there's a lot of issues. But the simplest one I would say is, like I said, is a jury nullification system. If the people who claim to be in favor of minorities in those minority areas, they run around and raising money and basically race baiting, if they actually cared, they'd teach those people about jury nullification. Yeah. And if those people understood it, system would come to a halt, baby. They could not get the convictions on all these bogus drug offenses and all stupid crap they haul people in on, minor amounts, all this police misconduct, all sorts of things could be halted. But they don't teach them that.
They don't want them to know.
Because they don't want them to know, because they're controlled, because they're there to make sure that people stay divided, fighting amongst themselves, instead of seeing the light and understanding the real issue here, the real danger is the state. I'm not interested in using the state to tell anybody what to do. But I also am completely opposed to anybody trying to use the state to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
We don't need the police to do anything except for the basic stuff. When you tell people that the police are a huge problem because they enforce any and every made up bullshit law you dream up, look at the masking and the vaxxing and closing businesses. That stuff went on all the time. And the police were there to enforce it. When you ask people, what's the point? They say, well, what would you do about murders? Okay, well, then police can investigate murder or robbery. Okay. Rape. Okay. All right, go down the list. They don't ever say minor drug possession.
Right.
They don't say that.
Yeah.
Drugs have been used to get the police into every aspect of our lives, every kind of illegal stop, every kind of outrageous infringement of our rights is supposedly to stop drugs. And the United States government doesn't have any authority to stop drugs at all. They have zero authority to outlaw drugs, none. And people used to know that. And there's an easy, simple proof. They had to pass a constitutional amendment to outlaw alcohol. Why? Why didn't they just ban it? I don't understand. Why didn't they just outlaw it like they do all these drugs? Why didn't they just put it on a schedule?
Right.
Because they don't have any authority to. And it's just right there in front of people's face, but they don't see it. And so they have to understand.
The government is the biggest. They are drug dealers themselves now. They set up where you can make sure you can do some drugs. You want some drugs? Here's a needle for you. And we're not going to let the
CIA runs a
you.
drug deal. Everybody knows the CIA is at the top of the drug pyramid. Everybody.
Lee, give me a quick answer to this because your time is up, but you're so interesting. Also, I got to tell you, I don't know if you know who the Hake report is, James Hake of the HakeReport.com. He highly recommended you, man. I'm glad. He told me, look, you got to get Lee. You got to get him. You want a grown-up conversation, you got to have Lee on. And he was totally right about that, man. You wanted to, Hake is number one, the Great White Hope number two. You're one of the smartest white men on this side of heaven. And that's amazing.
Well, thank you.
Well, one quick answer to this.
Yeah.
Is the U.S. Supreme Court any good now? Should we just not have faith in that? I mean, not expect anything good from that too?
Well, there's nothing in the Constitution in Article 3 that makes the Supreme Court's rulings the so-called law of the land. Nothing. Yeah. They're there to hear a case and decide one case. That's it. That's all they're there to do. They're not there to bind us all. In fact, there's personal jurisdiction requires that you be joined in the case before any kind of case can ever bind you. Yet, what do they tell you? As soon as the state court rules, we're all bound. And if they went back to the reality that the court is just there to hear individual cases, that's it. And it binds the parties to those cases. And if they make a bad decision, they can make another one. No other court below them has to follow that. If people understood that, who would care about the Supreme Court? Have you ever been involved in a Supreme Court case?
No.
I haven't either. None of us have. So why are we talking about it, right? Because of the brainwashing that they've made it into this idea that once the court rules, then we're all bound. What person who's sane would agree to such a crazy star chamber arrangement of a group of people they don't even control, who don't even have to decide unanimously, who then we're all bound forever, for all times? Anybody in the future? It's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense, but it's part of the control system.
Was that the original intent of the U.S. Supreme Court?
No, it was definitely not the intent of the Supreme Court. John Marshall, in his early decisions in Marbury versus Madison, in a case that's complete crap that everybody's taught in law school, where there was no jurisdiction, he just sort of dreamed this thing up, this idea that the court is there and it sits. Everybody knows about Andrew Jackson, who said after one of the decisions, he said, Justice Marshall's given his opinion, now let him enforce it. Right. They're not all powerful. They're not a co-equal branch. See, they talk about three co-equal branches. The branches aren't co-equal. Can the president remove the Congress? No. Congress can remove the president. The Supreme Court, who picks them? The president. They have to get put on there by the Senate. Well, they sit for good behavior. They don't sit for life. Good behavior. The Senate can remove a Supreme Court justice anytime they want. There's absolutely nothing that stops them but they've dreamed the system up so that we're stuck in this system where the people sit for decades and decades and decades and you can't get out of it. And then they give bad opinions and we have to supposedly wait decades and decades to try to get another case up in front of the court to see if we can get that's the farthest thing from anything to do with the people being in charge. It's turned on its head.
What a mess. So listen, I remember where Hake heard about you on Killstream. He saw He saw you on that. So we got to get you on the HakeReport.com. You're going to love it. He is another smart white man who is not afraid. So we got to get you there, all right? So let me do this. I got to heat up this interview and throw you on the hot seat. I need you to answer these questions as quickly as possible.
Uh-oh.
The hot seat. Would you ever let a woman lead you?
Lead me?
Yes. Would you ever let a woman lead you?
Lead me. I guess if she knew the way, out of the woods, I would. Yeah. I mean.
Is America the best country on this side of heaven?
Probably not.
Do we need more white babies?
Depends on what you want in the future.
Is Kamala Harris the worst vice president you've ever seen?
She's really bad.
Does a chicken have lips?
But they say they don't.
In your opinion, what is today's most reliable news outlet?
Wow. Maybe, boy, I don't know. I don't have a single one, I believe. So.
True or false? You cannot trust a person with anger.
Meaning that if someone's angry, I can't trust what they might do.
Can you trust a person? It's true or false? You cannot trust a person with anger. If that person has anger, they cannot be trusted.
It's certainly a red flag.
Amazing. Is it possible to have perfect peace?
No.
Is the earth flat or round?
They tell me it's a giant ball of water spinning 1,000 miles an hour. That's what they tell me. But you can't feel a thing.
Did the bear shit in the woods?
I've never seen one, but I've seen bear shit. Yes. In the woods.
Did you have fun?
Yeah, I had a good time.
Lee, thank you so much for coming on, man. And tell the folks how to get to your podcast, whatever you're doing out there to keep up with you.
Yeah, if they want to listen to my show, it's called The Quash. It's available pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast. I've also got a Patreon. I put a lot of my shows in there now, just because I get so much grief about my show, and I don't make a lot of appearances anymore, honestly.
Yeah.
You can also go to my Twitter. I'm actually on private because if I go on public, no one can see me, but they can follow me there. I'm Legalman at US Crime Review. And we have a movie coming out I wanted to tell people about called The Jones Plantation. Yeah. And I'm hoping it'll come out in the next few weeks. It's really a great liberty project. It's never been a movie like it. I play Mr. Jones. It's written based upon a story by Larkin Rose. Most people know Larkin and the freedom movement. And it's about going from chattel to debt slavery and the complete scam that our system is. And it's based on a plantation. I play a real piece of crap plantation owner who uses the system. And I think people are going to really like it. It's going to be out in a few weeks. And I hope when it comes out, people buy it. They make a lot of money, because if it makes money, then we'll make more. And I think every kind of different medium we can find is something we need to use.
And so the purpose of the movie is what?
It's to entertain people, but it's to entertain people with an allegory. We take people through and we show them the basic outline is that a guy shows up at a plantation and pretends to free the slaves and tells them that they're all free and they're going to be there and they get to vote for their own leader and they have a little election and everything else. But then they have their own script they create, which is just like the fake money we have. And it just shows that the people there genuinely believe they're so-called free, but their situation has not improved at all, maybe even got worse. But they get to vote, they get to pick, and they have all the same kind of fanciful dreamed up things of freedom we have, like getting to vote, as though it makes any damn difference. And
Yeah.
and it shows people the way the system actually functions,
Yeah.
and hopefully it'll wake people up to that idea.
Amazing. And the podcast is QUASH, folks. Quash.
Yes, the
All right.
quash. There's like the legal term.
Well, Lee, I totally enjoyed talking with you, man. It was very eye-opening. And thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget that The Fallen State is on locals.com now. So click the link to find the video description to support our work. I appreciate you all tuning in. Let me hear from you. Lee, I wish you well, man. Thanks for coming on.
Same to you. Take care.
All right now. Amazing.